I'm really sad to have to come here with this news, but Cormac McCarthy has just died today, everyone. And over the past 7 months, I have made 75 videos on Cormac McCarthy, and it has been, honestly, the most fun I've had on YouTube over the past 5 years. And of course, I hoped he would write another novel or two, do a couple more screenplays, give a couple more interviews. But what we do have is so monumental that I have thousands of videos planned on Cormac McCarthy that will come out over the course of the next couple decades. McCarthy only released 1.5 million words into the world, but what he did release have changed so many lives. I was an atheist, existentialist, asshole jerk. And at the age of 19, I came back to Cormac McCarthy for the second time and read all of his books, and he made me seek out nature, love literature, become a Luddite of sort. And without that moment in my life, I wouldn't be here now. I'd still be in some depressed, dark hole doing drugs or being an alcoholic. And that's what real literature does. That's what literature that doesn't navel gaze and focuses on the story and craft itself does. It actually can change your life. I'm done wasting my time on the shitty books that are getting published now that won't wreck my consciousness when I'm done, that won't make me contemplate reality. I'm finishing up a 10-hour breakdown of The Orchard Keeper for my Cormac McCarthy course. And the amount of depth and knowledge I pulled out of a 200-page book written by a random unknown kid in Tennessee that was 28 years old is insane. From day one, Cormac McCarthy was talented. If you look at his first publication in his high school newspaper, Autumn Magic, it's a piece of poetry, you can tell that he was destined to be a literary great. He didn't really come into that for another decade, but when he did, he came with the firestorm. And my favorite aspect of Cormac McCarthy's life is that he never sold more than 5,000 books until All the Pretty Horses. Blood Meridian didn't make him even close to $5,000 or $6,000. And he kept on chugging. He kept on living in poverty, having 2 wives leave him because he was trying to pursue his writing dream, because he was trying to share something with you and I. He knew that there was a place not just in the canon for him, but in our hearts. T.S. Eliot cannot change your life. He is canonical, but no one ever says, wow, I really contemplated life itself after reading Catcher in the Rye or whatever other classic they shove down our throats all the time. McCarthy also gave a big middle finger to the writing community in general, to guys like me. He never gave interviews. He never talked about his books. He said time and time again, I don't like hanging out with writers. He enjoyed the process and work. He maintained a writing habit basically his entire life, even in the busiest times in his life. In the late 60s, from around 1965 to 1974, he was with his second wife, Annie Delisle, and she was a socialite. She came from a very wealthy and uppity family in England, and she moved to a house stonemasoned by McCarthy in Tennessee that he was renovating. And every single day he would write for 6 or 7 hours in the middle of the day. And they were just living in utter poverty. And then at night they would go out and, do social events and hang out with people. And she imagined this life where they could make money and do these things. And McCarthy said, no, we have to wait. I'm not going to sell out. I'm not going to write a crappy book. I'm going to continue releasing crazy stuff like Child of God and Suttree that no one is going to get. And you could say that Blood Meridian was never appreciated until Columbine culture, until the 90s, when people became fixated on violence and lost parts of their soul. They started to circle jerk over Blood Meridian, which still continues to this day. But other than Blood Meridian, McCarthy has a vast bibliography of great works. I mean, I would say that Suttree, The Crossing are easily better than Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian stands very well as a Western novel and is canonical, but The Crossing and Suttree have a lot more to offer to our soul. You get some stuff on a soul level from Judge Holden, but from Billy Parham, you get things that you will take with you for the rest of your life. And McCarthy is really what an epic guy. I mean, he wrote epics, but when you look at him trying to be a scientist and move into the physics world, even the philosophers and writers he liked were the extreme ones. He had a love for the rebels, the Oppenheimers, the Wittgensteins. And I feel so sad. I've been imagining that Cormac McCarthy could go and I imagine going into a movie theater to see the new Oppenheimer movie and seeing Cormac McCarthy next to me. Like, that is a dream. I'm very sad that he isn't going to be able to see that. And we do not know the cause of death so far. I'm sure it was just old age or cancer, what people who are 90 die from. And one of my favorite quotes from McCarthy that I've loved since I was 14 years old is from No Country for Old Men. And I think Sheriff Bell, or one of the guys, another old guy Bell's talking to, says the only good thing about getting old is dying. And I always took that as McCarthy was once a very active and potent individual who not just had 2 children, 3 wives, a beautiful book career, but also maintained a bunch of different hobbies, traveled across the world, and very much in the United States, traveled all throughout Mexico on horseback and in Texas, and spent a vast amount of time also living across the United States, New Orleans, Chicago, North Carolina, Tennessee, Tucson, El Paso, Santa Fe. The list probably goes on. Spain, Portugal, France, England, a bunch of places that we'll never know about, that McCarthy never talked about. And men like him are far and few between anymore, you guys. People who are artists but aren't afraid to be a rough rider, not afraid to give an opinion. We all care so much about our identity, and Cormac never had an identity, the mysterious writer identity. Only maybe Thomas Pynchon is more reclusive than he is in terms of modern writers. And now, unfortunately, I also can't say, and this is going to bring a tear to my eye, that he's not the greatest living author anymore. I have to find someone else. Who's now the greatest living author? I don't know. And it feels weird because I also had this hope in my mind that McCarthy would one day come out and tell us what Blood Meridian was about. And I've had a running joke that if Cormac McCarthy came out and told us and did a breakdown on Blood Meridian, it still wouldn't get as many views as Wendigo, and it still would have people in the comments going, cap. And from what I can tell, McCarthy remained vastly disconnected from that culture. In the 2005 Vanity Fair interview that he did, he said that he didn't even own a computer. And I think 6 or 7 years ago, the Cormac McCarthy scholar Diane C. Lucy said that they had to correspond via letter because he was getting inducted into a literature encyclopedia, like the biggest one, and she was writing his entry, and so he wanted to, approve it. And they wrote by letters, not by email. So seemingly this is a man who never owned or dealt with computers other than maybe at the Santa Fe Institute while watching presentations. Cormac McCarthy joined the Air Force in 1952, only 7 years after the nuclear bomb was dropped. He was a part of one of the largest exoduses of a rural farming community in American history, especially in the 20th century, in the Blount County and Sevier County area of Tennessee, where his father, Charles McCarthy, ripped people off of their land with the Tennessee Valley Authority. His father was a lawyer whose job it was to make way for different environmental projects, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and a bunch of other stuff. And all these things deeply impacted McCarthy. All this post-nuclear talk, watching technology and civilization rip away an ancient culture. I mean, I shouldn't call it ancient, but a very established Appalachian culture. And it's, also very interesting that just the other day, Ted Kaczynski died who was also obviously a totally different type of person, a maniac, but also a very deep critic of civilization. And that old guard is dying now because there are a lot of people like me who say, I hate technology, I hate using social media, but here I am talking to you guys on YouTube. But I don't think McCarthy was a Luddite. I think that if he was born today, he would engage with technology. He would engage with going to the depths of the questions in life and with his own personal development journey. And when I reflect on where McCarthy is going to land in the canon, it scares me because obviously people are losing their ability to read. Every single day, reading rates are going down, and the canon is being not just rewritten, but deleted. And McCarthy, because of his reclusiveness, has not been canceled yet. And he also never got to win the Nobel Prize, which was the biggest load of bullshit of all time. It was just 100% political because McCarthy is a white American male who is a Republican, a conservative. Yes, that is a fact. Even if he writes, about liberal sentiments in his novels, that is why he never got the Nobel Prize. Bob Dylan? Are you fucking kidding me? They gave it to Bob Dylan so they didn't have to give it to Cormac McCarthy. So they could wait another 10 years before they had to give an award to an author that actually deserved it and not some random person that no one's ever heard of before. Anyway, I don't think McCarthy's going to be treated very nicely canonically. Obviously, he uses the N-word a ton during a lot of his novels, even up until Blood Meridian and a couple of his other later novels and screenplays. I don't have a problem with that. He is writing very accurate characters. That's what people in Appalachia in the 1930s talked like. But you can already see the attacks starting. You can also see it within the Cormac McCarthy community, as all academic communities, eats itself. You know, I was reading, I think their names are Lydia Cooper, Nell Sullivan, Stacey Peebles. They do all these critiques of masculinity and toxic masculinity, and Cormac McCarthy's works. And if you just go take a gander through Goodreads, you see all this just trash, just this drivel. When I look at most of the Cormac McCarthy community, this is literally what it is. If I go to the Reddit, if I go to Goodreads, if I look at the scholarship, there are some great people out there, but there are so many gatekeepers and people trying to shove random political opinions on the work that it's insane. And so in light of that, I think that he really doesn't have that much to stand on. He had Harold Bloom, who said that Blood Meridian was one of the greatest American novels of all time, and put him into the canon. But Harold Bloom has now been canceled. I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with all the different reviews and articles about McCarthy since The Passenger came out, but a lot of them have been hit pieces. I dug up so much shit talking about McCarthy when I was researching my Cormac McCarthy and Jeff Epstein video that it was insane. It made me very sad. And people tried to label me as hating on McCarthy with that video, but I was just trying to point out that he was on a board of trustees that took $25,000 from Jeff Epstein after his first arrest for child prostitution. But not to bring that up in the eulogy, but on this channel, we are not scared to go to the taboo places. And speaking of taboo places, I wonder what this means for the Blood Meridian movie. I literally just made a video yesterday or the day before on Cormac McCarthy is writing the screenplay of Blood Meridian. And from what it sounds like, the screenplay wasn't done yet. And so I'm taking a deep breath right now, because the one thing that was hopefully holding this whole thing together may have now just come crumbling down. One thing that, back to remembrance, one thing that I really feel connected to when it comes to Cormac is his love of animals, his love of the little sentient beings running around. I mean, many of you guys haven't read the unpublished screenplay, Whales and Men, but he really tries to make the connection between human and animals in that work. He was very into like early human anthropology and our connections through evolution to, monkeys and whatnot, but also to language and all these different things. He was also obviously a huge fan of wolves and hawks and mountain lions and studied them extensively. We know from his archive materials that he was reading books on them, and I'm sure we know he went to Yellowstone National Park. I mean, he saw them and studied them for sure, and that was just a major thing in his works that has always gone unnoticed, always just kind of rolls under the radar. In The Crossing, we have the wolf, and all the pretty horses, we have the horses. In The Orchard Keeper, we have the mountain lions. In multiple McCarthy novels, characters are, dealing with hurt hawks. And back to my earlier point, McCarthy is an artist, but does it for his own interests and curiosities. And guys, it's so hard today because, I'm probably like you. I want to be a professional writer. I want to be a big YouTuber. I got 2.7K subs right now, and I want things to go fast. I don't want to have to tell my wife that not that much money's coming in again this month from all this effort I'm putting in. And there are all these easy paths. I could start making book talk videos and just make all this money. And McCarthy, I don't think just never he didn't even question the money because he was so curious. It was said that when he was really young that he had so many different hobbies and interests that he did them all. He had every hobby and interest. All he did was just do things. He had no time for the TV or even for reading for a long time in his life because he was just so busy doing things. If you guys read The Passenger, he was writing about himself, I'm sure, when Bobby goes back to Tennessee. This really isn't a spoiler, and it's talking about, him going out into the woods as a child and, studying biology a bunch. And that's a hard path because with McCarthy's first wife, it must have been so hard to have to make that pivotal choice in his life. Like, talking about remembrance, in a shack in the middle of the woods in 1961, everyone, Cormac McCarthy's wife had just had a child. And Cormac had already written The Orchard Keeper. He already knew that he was the GOAT. A lot of us out there, when we write something, it fucking sucks. We all think that we're good writers, but statistically, 99 0.9% of us who are going to watch this will never write anything close to what McCarthy did with The Orchard Keeper. And he did it at 28 years old in like a year and a half. And his wife was already working a full-time job, and they were out of money. She was just working like a service industry job. And there was this baby at home, and they were just in poverty. They were using samples. They would get samples, like sample toothpaste and stuff to use. And the wife came to McCarthy, and his first wife came to McCarthy and gave him this ultimatum. And she said, hey, you can be a writer. You can do this all they want, but you need to go get a job. We both need to be working, because I don't know if you remember, but I want to be a writer too. We met in a creative writing class at college. We're both writers. Why do you get to write and I don't get to write? And McCarthy at that moment made the decision, everybody, that would change his life. And once again, we're talking about the good and bad here today, everyone. He told her, go get a second job. I'm the best. I'm going to make this happen. You need to go work 60 or 80 hours a week, and I'll take care of the baby at home. And so she fled. She left him. She, seemingly made the right decision for her and what most of us would do. And that inspired McCarthy, though, to get into Outer Dark. And that was a huge transition period for McCarthy, because The Orchard Keeper does have a lot of Faulkner in it, but it also has some immature and aggressive prose. It uses cliches and a lot of things that you never see again in McCarthy. Even though the turnover period for Outer Dark and Child of God was only 5 years total to get those next two books out, he doesn't use a lot of the tactics he does in The Orchard Keeper. I mean, it's the biggest transition of McCarthy that we ever, even bigger than the transition from Blood Meridian to The Orchard Keeper. All the Pretty Horses. And I think it affected him for the rest of his life. And it's making me emotional to think about this, but without that hard choice, we'd be having to read Lonesome Dove as the iconic Western American novel still. We wouldn't have a lot of the great writers that have been inspired by McCarthy, David Foster Wallace, and so many others. So I remember when I first saw No Country for Old Men, 2007, I was 14 years old, and holy fuck, blew my mind. I was just like, oh, wow, this bad guy, right? There's this bad guy, and he has a gun, and all this crazy stuff. I felt so attached to it, and like the nihilism in it. Like I said, I was reading existentialism and all the Russian writers and Nietzsche and whatnot. And then I remember going to my school library, and thank God my public school library in Las Vegas, Nevada, had every single Cormac McCarthy book, and I got No Country for Old Men. And I remember opening it up and reading the italicized scenes, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And, as I read, I realized it was really about Sheriff Bell, that, there was this action story, but it was just like a commentary on old age. And I was like, man, like, this is crazy. And that really made me contemplate old age for the first time, everybody. And it's crazy kind of coming full circle now and talking about Cormac McCarthy's death 15 years later, everyone. 15 years later. And I thought he was already old back then. He was already 75 back then. And I thought, man, that must just be so hard. And I remember trying to show everyone, you guys know how it is when you're young, and even today when you have this new book. I tried showing everyone these books, man. And I was reading all of them, and then I read The Crossing and just had like a mental breakdown about life. Like what that book showed me was there was nothingness, and like it sent me deeper into, the thinker thinks what the prover proves. And I just went with a confirmation bias with his works, but I read all of his works and it sent me into a frenzy. But it also let me know that there was like something greater out there in the world, that there was like a deeper connection. And at the time I thought I was too young to understand a lot of it. I knew it was great, but it wasn't until years later when I was at the lowest spot of my life. When I was 19, you guys, man, like I was on the verge of death. I was so self-destructive. It was crazy. All my best friends, all three of my best friends around me had already died in the last year at that point, and I was right there behind them. I had gotten 3 major concussions that had cracked my head open in about 3 months time. And you're like, how is that possible? Because I just didn't stop doing like extreme things. And at the lowest point, after the 3rd concussion that knocked me out in this short amount of time, I lost the ability to read, everyone. Like this is, a lot of you guys maybe haven't heard this origin story for a while, but I couldn't read anymore. And I had always been a reader, and I lost my ability to read and write. And I was at University of Utah for philosophy, and I failed out that semester because I couldn't process anything. I would read words, and like I had no short-term memory because of how fuzzy things were. Just had constant headaches, and like it was just nausea. It was so bad. And so I had to like stop my whole life, and like I started to meditate and like get really into yoga and like things that didn't require thinking and like just sitting. And one of the only books I had on my shelf at that time, when away from home, that I had brought with me was No Country for Old Men. And that was the book that helped me start to read again. That was the first novel and real book that I read from cover to cover. And I would have to read the pages over and over again because I wouldn't remember. Like I would be in a coffee shop and I'd read 5 pages and like look up and zone out and be like, I don't know what just happened. And I can't say I actually got very much out of it because that didn't necessarily get better, but it started the process of me recovering from these traumatic brain injuries. And most of all, it helped push me toward nature. It whispered to me like, there's something more out in nature. And we all know that. But because of that, I started to dedicate and like look deeper into nature. And I started reading a couple Cormac McCarthy journals and scholarly books, and like nature was a big focus. So I started to be like, this seems like it's really important. And I dropped out of university, moved up to Oregon, started working a part-time job, and just spent all my time out in nature. At one point, I lived out Mount Hood in the woods alone for months. Wasn't working, wasn't doing anything, was just literally immersed. And I imagined myself during those moments, like one of the main themes that I was imagining was like the Border trilogy. And more so than that, McCarthy himself saying that, man, I want to be like this. I want to be able to say fuck you to all these, the intelligentsia, all the people who I had encountered at university that had rubbed me the wrong way, and all the professors and all these, and society and technology and all these things that I just detested. I wanted to throw all those things away and be like Cormac. And, you know, when you're young, you need those idols. Now that I'm older, I'm not trying to be like Cormac. I've found my own way and I have a different path. But at that time, if I had chosen anybody else, my life would not be as good as it is now. Because I feel like when you're young, the idols and the people you strive to be like and you choose are pivotal in terms of like personality development. And because of that, you know, I've lived a very reclusive life here in the Southwest for the 8 or 9 years since then, since those times in Oregon. And it has been sad. I have to imagine that McCarthy was sad when he left his second wife and his first wife and moved out to El Paso and Santa Fe and be watching these desert sunsets. But it's also the most liberating feeling that I ever thought I could imagine, you know, being free of the distractions of technology, of these constraints, to be able to say that I am creative, that I can work on something for 6 decades. McCarthy worked on The Passenger for 6 decades, that I can slow down, that I can be poor for a couple decades and people will still love me and I can still be successful and make an impact on the world. And so for all my Cormac fans out there who are suffering today and like are sad, I'm sad too, but Cormac would tell us to shut down the laptop. He would tell us to read, to go watch the sunset, to take a walk with our dog. That's all he'd want us to do. That's literally his advice. He said at one point, that's what you need to do. Just close the laptop, shut the phone down, and read a book. And so this channel will never be the same now because Cormac's now dead. They're going to be burying his body in the ground the next couple days, and all those beautiful words and that potential is now gone. But the inspiration that he can give us is still alive. So let's continue this journey together. And, you know, I'm sorry, this sucks.